Now, in his article, Adams points out that when he's discussed this line of thought at various talks that he's given, conferences and so forth, things that professional philosophers like to get involved in, he often gets an objection along the following lines. People will say to him something like the following: "Look, Adams, you might as well suggest to a pregnant, expectant mother that she take a pill that will cause her fetus to be born with a deformity, so long as she'll fully and gracefully love the child when she's born." People will say in objection to Adams, look, from your point of view, wouldn't that be perfectly morally acceptable for the expectant mother to do such a thing? So long as she loves the child when it's born, it seems like her behavior is perfectly morally acceptable. Adams replies, well, actually, I agree that doing so would be wrong, but that does not show that there's anything wrong with my theory, because that's not quite a relevant analogy. And his idea is the following: that there's a distinction between creating a world where life for most creatures is worth living, even if it's a less perfect world than might have been created, on the one hand, and creating a world in which life for many or most creatures is substandard relative to what is normal for creatures of that species. It's pretty plausible that when a child is born with a congenital deformity, in this case caused by a pill that the expectant mother took, it's pretty plausible that the child's life, even if that child is capable of happiness, even if that child will be fully loved by its parent or parents, still that child's living a life that is substandard relative to what is normal for our species. And so Adams is in a position to say that's what makes the mother's choice, if she chooses to take that pill, that's what makes her choice wrong, even if she ends up loving the child fully and unstintingly throughout the rest of her life. It's still wrong for her to take that pill, because what results is a creature who lives a life that is substandard relative to what's normal for the species. But so long as the child that you create, or the population of the world that the GCB creates, lives lives that are relatively normal, that are normal relative to what is standard for the various species that exists, Adams will say, then there's no moral defect in the behavior of the GCB. So as long as that life is relatively normal for most creatures of most species, Adams will say, there's no objection that you can raise to the GCB creating the world that the GCB has created, so long as most people and members of other species live lives that are not substandard. Now, this is a response that Adams can give in response to that objection that we just mentioned about the mother who's contemplating taking the pill. But you might say, okay, Adams, I understand how this responds to that problem, but still, the analogy with the current situation on our planet is not perfect, because one might argue, actually, a huge number of people, human beings, live lives that are vastly inferior, vastly substandard relative to what is normal for our species. And I'm not talking about the fact that not enough people on the planet have smartphones or an internet connection. I'm talking about how not enough people on the planet have reliable sources of non-contaminated drinking water. I'm talking about how approximately 24,000 people per day die of starvation. I'm talking about the number of people who have limbs blown off because of stepping accidentally on landmines, and on and on and on. You might suggest, therefore, in response to Adams, that, well, the goldfish puppy analogy is reasonable but only takes us so far. The reason is that if we, these inhabitants of the planet as it exists now, are like the goldfish, then the problem is all too many of us goldfish are missing scales, or have broken fins, or have broken other body parts that prevent us from being able to live proper lives, even if the relatively privileged people that are students at this university or are connected with this university in one way or another, primarily citizens of the United States, primarily in the first world and so forth, we're relatively well off. If we remember for a moment how atypical we are relative to the rest of the human race, we might think that actually if we're goldfish, then all too many goldfish are swimming around our fishbowl, so to speak, with many missing scales or broken fins or other aspects of our lives that are somehow substandard, diseased water, contaminated water, etc. So Adams might, that is to say, give us something more powerful than just a defense, but not yet a full theodicy, that is to say, not yet a full line of thought that explains how the actual, current, I think I would suggest, enormous amount of evil, both physical and moral, is compatible with the existence of a GCB. I'm hoping that you'll take the opportunity in this class, in one of your writing assignments, to think about how Adams' line of thought might be extended from beyond a defense to the challenging of the proposition P, to the idea that perhaps the actual amount of evil that exists in the world today is compatible with the existence of the GCB.